Okay. Welcome all. Thanks for joining again for the second Hashkafa in the workplace Vaad. I just want to be placed and thank our hosts, link with Torah Links, for having us. Also want to thank the organizers, Ezi and Mati, and welcome everybody here. I just want to start with one short introduction before we start. The Gemara in Tainus tells an interesting thing. The Gemara says that there was a Mekes Dam, a doctor of sorts, Abba Umna, that a Baskel used to come out daily and greet him, so to speak, and acknowledge that he was doing well. Abaya, on the other hand, would only get said Baskel once a week, and Rava would only get it once a year. So the Gemara says that Abaya was a little bit in trouble by this and wanted to figure out why Abba Umna was so deserving of this Baskel this often. So Abaya inquired into the behavior habits of this Abba Umna, and he found out that the Chiyavi Avid Milsa, when he would do his job, he would separate the men and women, he would provide clothing that allowed for tznius, he wouldn't overcharge those who couldn't afford it, and when a Talmud Chacham would come, he would even up the ante and he would give the Talmud Chacham money to go buy himself something to eat so he could come back to himself after the procedure. So, and the Gemara then concludes with Abaya conducting a bit of another test to see the stature of this person, and the Gemara seemingly concludes that this was a worthy reason for Abba Umna to be given this special treatment of a Baskel every single day. Now, seemingly, what we could take out of this Gemara is that someone who succeeds in transcending the mundane and turning his daily life and his daily workplace into an environment that conforms with everything the Torah wants from him is, in a certain way, even on a higher level, and deserves this approbation from Shemayim, this Baskel, on a daily level. Now, another nakuda is that a baskel is kilu clarity that HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides to people who are searching for clarity. It's an approbation, it's some clarity. So I would just say that this is a tzibur of people who are striving to follow in Abba Umna's ways and achieve, the proper Hashkafa Satira in all their daily life. And we're zeicha to the clarity, a baskel of our day, to be able to hear some clear and salient Das Torah from the Rav. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Isai, for the opportunity to share Divrei Torah with you and be mischazik together with you. It's hard and difficult to imagine a more appropriate time to discuss Ibn Torah's Hashkafa in the engagement in Yigia Kapayim and Pasha Shkolim. The Chidushi Harim, as brought in Siach Sarkei Kodesh, explains that the sequence of the Daled Parshias are a build-up towards Chodesh Nisan, and as such, each parsha specifically relates to a specific stage of Hachana as we prepare for the Hischadshus of Klal Yisrael in Chodesh Nisan. And if we begin with Parsha Shkolim, that means we're beginning with Inyanim, says the Chidush Harim, which address the moment of someone. In which case we see that in the sequence of Avodah, engaging in Aliyah in the areas of moment is foundational. And so the Chidush Harim says Parsha Shkolim is the Kedusha of the moment of Klal Yisrael. Parsha Zohar deals with the Biur Hara, Biur Amalek. Para allows us to then proceed to an additional madrega of Tara. Parsha Chodesh represents the ultimate goal, which is renewal, Chidush. And so when we begin the process of Aliyah, we begin with first the process of being Mekadesh, everything that makes up our material context. Then we begin with internal Biur Hara, we proceed to Taira, and then proceed to Chidush. Parsha Shkolim represents the ability of Momen to represent Kofer Nefesh. That's the way the Torah describes what the Nesina b'Shekel is. L'chaper al nafshei seichem. By merely going through the act of giving a machzah shekel to the Rebbeinu Shalom, we somehow accomplish something called a Kofer Nefesh. It's difficult to understand. A half shekel wasn't a large amount of money. How is it that by being able to give away a machzas shekel, we accomplish something as special and as foundational as kofer nefesh? The Baal HaTanya, in the beginning of the Sefer, makes the following observation. He says, if one looks through Yerushalmi, then whenever the Yerushalmi refers to just mitzvah, just the word mitzvah, the Yerushalmi is referring to the mitzvah of tzedakah. Now, our discussion is not about the significance of tzedakah or about the significance of being able to part with one's mammon, but more using the significance of the mitzvah of tzedakah to explain what our relationship to our Yegiya Kapayim is. So the Baal HaTanya offers us the following insight why it is that stam mitzvah is tzedakah. And he says, because when we engage in the pursuit of generating wealth, he says that activity draws within it every aspect of ourselves. Our intelligence, our drive, our ambition, our physical energy. When a person has a goal, when a person sets themselves an ambition, an agenda, a drive, that incorporates every aspect of self, from one's seichel down to one's most basic energy, one's basic koyach. He says, therefore, when we generate wealth, we're zeicha to generate as a result of bracha being granted to us, then that we've earned and that we've regenerated, we see as an extension of ourselves. And it is an extension of ourselves. It represents drive, it represents ambition, it represents intelligence, it represents strength, it represents energy, it represents all that is incorporated within ourselves. Memele says the Baal HaTanya, the importance of tzedakah, that it's called stam mitzvah, is because even though ordinarily a mitzvah is associated with a particular part of a person, whether it's achilas matzah, which refers to the pear, netilas lulav, which refers to the yodayim, each mitzvah is mekadesh a specific aver in the guf. The Baal HaTanya says that our pursuit of earning, which is then reflected in our ability to then forego that for a higher purpose, is really incorporates a totality of ourselves and is the ability to give away self. And he says, as opposed to any other mitzvah, which relates and is mekadesh a specific part of the person, tzedakah is mekadesh in a person's entire being. Now again, our discussion is not focused so much on the tzedakah part, but we then understand that our pursuit of accomplishing materially is something which is an all-encompassing occupation. And therefore, not just can we elevate that and forego it through tzedakah, but we then realize that if our approach to the engagement in Yegiya Kapayim is with that sense that this is occupying ourselves and every part of us, and we can infuse that with Ritzonah Yisbarach, then we've been mekadesh every part of ourselves. That's the reason why giving away a machzah shekel can be a kofer nefesh. Because however, it's not the amount which is significant. The ability for a person to forego what represents the expression of ambition, drive, intelligence, energy, motivation, and to give that away is the person foregoing something which represents nefesh. And therefore, the nesina of machzas shekel, says the Chidush Arim, is the first step in avodas Hashem, because in the parasha of machzas shekel, it includes the ability to gain a kedusha perspective on an activity which engages every part of ourselves. The Rashba in a tshuva discusses why we don't make a bracha on machzas shekel. And he says the reason why we don't make a bracha is because when we give the shekel, he says, it's because miyodcha nosanu loch. we're returning back to the Rebbeinu Shalom, what is ultimately and originates with the Rebbeinu Shalom Kiviyachal himself. Which means that when we are able to forgo our moment, we look at that as just another aspect of the Kedusha and the Ratzon Hashem, which envelops and engages and defines everything that we do in the pursuit of earning. And if it's the Ratzon of Rebbeinu that should we give it away, that's another aspect of that same process of engaging in the Ratzon of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Rabbi Chana Wasserman, in a letter that is printed in the back of Kaivet Sa'aris, discusses the basic question of how we find the balance between limud HaTorah and engaging in parnasa. And he says that ordinarily we understand that the way in which we approach that question is by looking at engaging in parnasa as something that we're compelled to do in order to be able to sustain ourselves. And therefore we take the approach that we forego as much Torah learning as we can because we're compelled to engage in something which is a necessity. So that's ordinarily the way we conceive of it. And Rabbi Chanan explains that this is a mistake. He says, in the same way as any mitzvah which we have a chiyuv to engage in forgoes Talmud Torah, we take time from Limud HaTorah to daven, we take time from Limud HaTorah to do any of the mitzvahs of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Parnasa is another of the mitzvahs which the Rebbeinu Shalom has charged us to do. The mitzvah of V'asafta degonecha, the Gemara in the beginning of Ketzad Mevarchim that we're familiar with. That, says Rabbi Chanan, is a mitzvah the same as any other mitzvah b'Torah. And the same way as any other mitzvah b'Torah forgoes limud HaTorah, so too the mitzvah being Eisik in Parnasa is a mitzvah. So when discussing what our approach is towards Eisik HaParnasa, we understand that we're doing no less than being Mekayim another one of the mitzvahs HaTorah. And this is not just a theoretical discussion in terms of how we balance technically limud HaTorah and engaging in parnasa. It should create a shift in mindset. Many of us engage in business or whatever activity we're engaged in through which we are Isaac in parnasa, with the understanding that, in the same way as there's an expression that everything is fair in love and war, so everything sort of becomes fair in the world of business because the world of business is by definition profane. The world of business by definition is something which we're compelled to engage in as something which we're almost an onus, as Rabbi Chanan puts it, to be involved with. And somehow the Rebbeinu Shalom and the world of business sort of make an uneasy accommodation with each other. But fundamentally, when we leave our homes, we leave the Beis Medrash, we leave wherever we are, and we enter into the business world, we're entering into a godless world. Because what is Kedusha and Ruchnius is in the Beis Medrash, and everything else was somehow an onus to engage in because the Rebbeinu Shalom created a world in which we have to sustain ourselves. And that's a lost opportunity to in fact see that the Beis Medrash and the outside world are completely seamless. There's a volume of Shulchan Aruch which deals with the world outside the Beis Medrash, and there's a volume of Shulchan Aruch which deals with the world inside of the Beis Medrash, and there's no difference between the two. The sense that somehow we're compelled to engage in something which is subpar in Ruchnius, it's somehow bidi eved, a necessity, something which we're compelled to do, leads us to a place where we kind of feel that anyway we're sort of out of the realm of Ruchnius, and therefore everything is fair. And we so often hear, unfortunately, the expression of, well, it's business after all, which somehow makes business a sort of a godless sphere of activity, chas v'shalom. Because, well, we can't make that consistent with the Beis Medrash, and we have understood we're somehow engaging something in which we're compelled to act. So we kind of create a split in our minds, and we disassociate our ruchniistic selves, our growing selves, our halachic selves, from everything that exists within the realm of business, in which case then everything becomes fair. And it's not just so incorrect, and it's not just so wrong, but it's a lost opportunity that something which we have to engage in, we can infuse with the significance of mitzvah, with the significance of the fulfillment of the Ratzon of the Rebbeinu Shalom, as a process of aliyah, and unwittingly we can find ourselves being deprived and depriving ourselves of that opportunity. Even from a narrow halachic perspective, it's told about Rabbi Yisrael Salanta that Rabbi Yisrael Salanta encouraged someone to take on the position of a town sheikhet, which in those days was not just a position which had a significant remuneration, but it was also a position of a lot of responsibility and a lot of ruchniistic significance, as is evidenced by a multitude of tshuvas that were about how to assign and how to take away, perhaps, the position of town sheikhet. And the young man who Rabbi Yisrael was talking to said, he's afraid of the responsibility of perhaps making a mistake in the shechita or releasing a treifa and so on. So Rabbi Yisrael then asked him, so what career do you want to engage in? And he says, I think I'll go into the world of business. So Rabbi Yisrael said there are more simonim in Shulchan Aruch that govern how to do business in a halachically sound way than govern the halachas of shechita. You're exchanging a relatively straightforward realm of activity for one that is far, far more complex, even from a halachic standpoint. Imagine. And therefore, the first point of chizuk which I felt I would want to share and with the tzibur is that this tzibur of Bnei Aliyah is to see that the world of business activity and the Beis Medrash are seamless. If we find ourselves living in two different ways, then we haven't fully bridged the way of actualizing the Ratzon Hashem in our business endeavors. If our sense of self changes when we move from one activity to the other, then we haven't created within ourselves that holistic sense of this is all Avodas Hashem. The Chachmas Adam, the famed Chachmas Adam, the author of the Chachmas Adam and the Chaya Adam, he writes in his introduction to Chachmas Adam that by trade, despite being one of the Dayanim in Vilna, his parnasa came from being a merchant. And he describes how he would travel to the fair in Danzig and come back. And he said what enabled him to make those two worlds consistent and be able to write his Sfarim and continue to engage in learning despite the disparity between the two. The distance between Leipzig and Vilna wasn't just kilometers on a train track, it was worlds. And he said the reason is because I saw no difference between the two. As I was engaged in business, my mind was on my learning, and when I was engaged in learning, my mind was at the Rebbeinu Shem Sisha and Bracha in my business, and it was a seamless whole. And he said, therefore, I didn't see it as being a dramatic and radical departure from the Beis Medrash when I went to engage in business, and vice versa, because it was part of a seamless whole. And that allows us to see the two as consistent and to bring Kedusha from one into the other without seeing the two as being fundamentally different. And this is important in terms of the pride that we should feel in ourselves, in that this is the way in which the Rebbeinu Shalom is sending us bracha. No less than the Nefesh HaChaim that taught us the centrality and how sublime and how elevated Limud HaTorah is, both to the person themselves and to the universe as a whole, writes very clearly in Shar Aleph that to engage in Vasafta de Ganecha is the rotzen of the Rebbeinu Shalom for the Klal Yisrael. It's not a concession, it's not a b'diavad. He says we paskin like Rabbi Shmuel, that we are mitzuvah to be oisik in parnasa, and that is the ultimate rotzen of the Rebbeinu Shalom for Klal Yisrael. And we should be able to look at ourselves that way and see that when we are engaged in the activity of parnasa, we are engaged in the rotzen of the Rebbeinu Shalom. the Shla HaKadosh brings in Maseches Chulin and Shla, that there's a l'shem yichud that a person can say before departing to work. A l'shem yichud. Not all of us might have the minhag to say l'shem yichud, but we know l'shem yichud from the Siddur, that's before Talis and before Tefillin and before we start Baruch Sha'amar. L'shem yichud, we're making yichudim in Olam Yisrael Yonim. We're fulfilling the deepest rotzen of the Rebbeinu Shalom for the Bria. L'shem yichud kutshabrichu shchinte hinni hoylech lasik b'masa u'matam. There's a medrash that's quoted that Chanoich toifer min olim haya. Chanoich so choose. He was a shoemaker. Val kol tfira v'tfira haya meyachet yichudim. Means when we're engaged in the mundane, we're being oisik in tikkun abriya. This is not random. It's not a concession. It's not something that's just a necessary evil. It's Ritzayin Yisbarach. The Chovos HaLevavos in Sha'ar B'Tachon speaks about how we choose a career. And he says that the choice of a career of a person is for a person to introspect in themselves, look at their strengths and weaknesses, and see that if the Rebbeinu Shalom created me with a certain cluster of talents, that means the rotzen of the Rebbeinu Shalom was that it should be oisik and kach v'kach. And that's how you fulfill bitachon and ishtadlus in terms of choosing a career, just as an example. Which means that what the Chovos HaLevavos essentially is teaching us is the Rebbeinu Shalom has prepared us in the talents, the insight, the ability that He's given us to be able to fulfill that role. When we mispal atachoin and la'adam das, we don't just mean to be able to understand the sugya that we're learning. We're just as much asking for the Rebbeinu Shalom to give us insight in terms of the strategic decisions that we make. And that's all part of the das that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives us. Rebbe Yapian would often say, when you would stand in London next to a subway station, and you would see streams of people commuting to work, he would say the difference between it just being a mundane activity and being kedusha just lies in the kavanah. Just shifting the mindset that we're being oisek in avodas Hashem in every part of it transforms it from business to avodah. It's such an opportunity. It's an opportunity to grasp in terms of our own sense of self. And that pride, as the Nefesh HaChaim says, in fulfilling the rotzen of the Rebbeinu Shalom for Klal Yisrael, should instill in us the pride to give that over to our children. Personally, I come from a background where my parents were from a Yakasha Kehillah. There was a pride in being an upstanding, honest, noisev and noisen be'emunah. People were admired for integrity. It was a ruchniistic calling. It was a ruchniistic standing. The title Hachover, which was given out to a respected and senior balabayas, was very often given to someone who had a reputation for outstanding integrity in business. It was something as children we grew up admiring and aspiring to. The idea that someone was impeccably honest. Someone whose masa u'maton was be'emunah in all the way that the Torah requires it to be be'emunah. That's a pride. If we can create a seamless transfer between our homes, between the Beis Medrash, between business, and that's mekadesh everything that we do, then it's part of avodah. And it's a pride with which our children will carry, and our children will see that we have. It's something magnificent to be someone who has a reputation of what's called in Chazal a shem tov. It's something that's priceless and something which we can all aspire to. And this idea of going for mitzvah, and that all our masumaton is mitzvah, gives us something also which we yearn for, and that is something called shomer mitzvah lo yeda davar ra. As we leave the Beis Medrash and engage in the world of masumaton, it's a world of nisayon. Not just a world of nisayon in terms of kedusha, not just in terms of integrity. The Chovos HaLevavos says one of the reasons why the Rebbeinu Shem created the Bria, and which his rotzen is that we should engage in Parnasa, is because, as the Chovos HaLevavos says, that gives us the greatest test in life, where we can keep consistent in our own minds a world which seemingly rewards just effort and rewards guile and rewards intelligence, and the idea that everything is the rotzen of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Says that's one of the greatest nisyonos that face, and that's the purpose of the Rebbeinu Shalom creating a world which requires masel matam. We want to retain that purity, we want to retain that integrity, we want to retain that kedusha, we want to attain that focus. Shomer mitzvah lo yeda davaro. We have a number of sugyas in which someone engaged in mitzvah is zoiche to a shmira el yoina, which isn't the same if a person is being oisik in divrei chayil. By elevating our masel maton to the status of mitzvah, we've merited a shmira el yoina. And it's not just a shmira el yoina for us; it's a shmira el yoina it's a shmira el yoina from all those that may have designs on what we're doing. The world in which we trade, the world in which we do business can be ruthless. And there's only a limit to how much we can outsmart the competition, how much we can outsmart those whose practices are not with the same degree of integrity as ours. We need shmira. Shomer mitzvah leyeda dovaro. Gam ki elech begeit salmoves le'irura ki ata imodi. I walk with the hashgacha of the Rebbeinu Shalom. My path is paved by the Rebbeinu Shalom's hanhaga and hashgacha. We can be zeicha to that by inspiring ourselves and living that our engagement in Eisek HaParnasa is mitzvah. Shomer mitzvah leyeda dovaro. We elevate the entire way in which the Rebbeinu Shalom is mashgiach and manig what we do. It also, and with this point we'll conclude, it also elevates our tefillah. We often struggle with the ability to be mispalel. Firstly, because the rarefied and elevated world which tefillah takes us to often seems so incongruous with the world which we occupy. And secondly, I think if we introspect, we often feel, Rebbeinu Shalom, how can I daven for these things? Ultimately, we feel inadequate and we feel, should I be davening for this? Is this something which can be included with the nusach of the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah? It's kedai to share an avodrom that the Beis Yosef brings. Tfilas HaMincha has the greatest eis rotzen of all the tfilas of the day. We just had in last week's Haftarah, Vayi ba'lois HaMincha. That's when Eliyahu Hanavi's tfilos were answered, which created the momentous Yisroirus in Klal Yisrael of Hashem Hu Elokim, and the vanquish of the Sheker of the Nevi'ah Abau. Vahi ba'lois HaMincha. The Avodrom says that the reason why Mincha is an eis rotzen is because if a person is able to step away from the rush of his activity at the height of the middle of the day and be able to reconnect with the Rebbeinu Shalom, that generates the greatest eis rotzen possible. Now, how does one do that? How does one step out and then step into tefillah? The answer is because there's no contradiction at all. It's two forms of Avodas Hashem. The Chovos HaLevavos just says we live the nisayon of recognizing that all that we're oisik in is masel matan is just a reflection of Etzoni's bar. If we then are able to come into tefillah samincha, then adarabah, tefillah and what we're oisik in are one whole. When we're mispal for hatzlacha in business, it's not as though we're stepping out and asking the Rebbeinu Shalom for something sort of second rate. We're asking that the Rebbeinu Shalom should allow hatzlacha to come b'masi aldeinu as a reflection of his hashgacha, as a reflection of his chesed, as a reflection of his hatava. Then tefillah is then consistent with everything we do. To summarize the chizuk, which I felt I wanted to share, that we can be inspired together with, is to recognize how much kedusha, how much mitzvah, and how much rotzen Hashem lies in what we do. And rather at looking at how to try and make consistent two things which somehow lu'umas the Beis Medrash, the boardroom is somehow something else. That isn't combined with malacha, that isn't merged with malacha, won't last and will be geir avay. The Torah will be geir avay. Says the Sfasemes, and the Sfasemes' Vaad is the summary of, I think, what we've discussed together tonight. The Sfasemes says that if a person remains, we'll use a modern term, remains split between his Torah side and his mundane side, then not just hasn't he successfully merged his mundane side with his Kedusha, but his Torah can actually lead him astray because it's not integrated. And the Torah can be Chas v'Shalom Gereres Avay. Because he thinks that the two somehow have this uneasy coexistence. But in reality, he's completely split between the two. And then Chas v'Shalom, even the Torah itself can lead the person to error. He says it's only when the two can be combined then Adarabba has a kiyum. Kol Torah she'eni melacha seifa b'Torah, because if a person remains schizoid, if he remains somehow completely split between the two, then not just hasn't he been able to be Mekadesh, the mundane part of what he is, but Adarabba, he's undermined the wholesomeness of the Torah which he has. The Chizuk is, Rabbi say, they are one and the same. We are Baalei Avodah in Beis Medrash, and we are Baalei Avodah in the boardroom. And all of that is Mekadesh, everything that we do, so that Be'ezra Hashem, not just can we be Zeicha to Shem Mitzvah L'Yedid of Ara, but in the words of the Nefesh HaChaim, we can be Zeicha to the Mekayim of the Rotzen HaYoser of the Rebbeinu Shalom for Klal Yisrael, B'siyata D'Shmaya.